Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is obviously your number one Shogun here, Sugi, coming back after almost 6 months of hiatus. I just been incredibly busy with work, and that's not going to be changing anytime soon. But I still been catching up with a lot of the anime from the previous season and also trying out some of the stuff from the current season. And today I want to talk about one of the more hyped shows from the winter 2024, and that is Solo Leveling, which was quite hyped going into the season, and it still probably ended up being top 3 shows in terms of rankings on a lot of these websites. So definitely it lived up to its hype to a certain extent. And initially I was like, oh, this is another isekai series, I'm just definitely not gonna be giving it even a shot. But then I read that it's actually based on a Korean manhwa. And a lot of these Korean webtoons and manga tend to be kind of more unique, at least the ones that are getting the anime adaptations like the Tower of God and the God of High School. Like, some of these shows are just interestingly different from a lot of the stuff that we are used to seeing coming from Japan. Obviously, Japan comes with a lot of unique stuff as well, but most of the season, when a new season drops in with 50 new anime, like 40 of them are very generic. But a lot of these Korean things, they have been kind of twisting the formula, and that's what I want to talk about here. Why the Japanese isekai sucks so much. And it really comes down to 2 things. One is that the fantasy worlds that they build out on these isekais are just shit and not interesting. Like, let's for example talk about Forgotten Realms, which may not ring bell to a lot of you people, but this is the basis of the fantasy world for Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, and Dungeons and Dragons. And that world is very well detailed with its lore, races, and spells, and every system that coexists inside it. So that's why the fantasy games and IPs that have been built around Forgotten Realms have been fundamentally very interesting. And this is also the key formula with a lot of Lord of the Rings or Wheel of Time. People like these fantasy shows because they got actually good worlds. And most of the time when we are getting these isekais, they are the most generic shit possible. And the other part, which Japanese are really bad at, has been what is really the core concept of isekai. It means a new world, or that's Shinsekai. I mean, isekai is like another world or something like that, the correct translation. But usually what happens in these Japanese isekais is that the main character dies and he's reborn in another world, okay? And everything that happened in the past world is totally erased and has no correlation whatsoever. Maybe there's another character who died in that world and also appearing on the new one, but there's no correlation between the 2 worlds that have existed, okay? It just serves as some type of a back, flip into the real story. So might as well not be even an isekai. I mean, the idea is kind of like the character is thrown into the new world, so you're kind of exploring the world from the lens of the new character. But this is just like some type of a weird beta, escapism, really, because the real world sucks in Japan, so we have to write about these isekai things where people go immerse themselves and don't have to do the fucking 9-to-5 wagey stuff. That's what it's really about, and that's why it's probably resonating with so many people in Japan. But really, when we look at successful isekai shows, I think about Harry Potter, because there's a dynamic between the 2 worlds. The 2 worlds are technically with war each other. I mean, there are certain, things around which go into that, and obviously the Harry Potter prequel series, The Fantastic Beasts, goes a lot more into that dimensional dynamic between the muggles and the people who are magicians, wizards. And but in the same vein, there are things like Inuyasha. That's an isekai series, and there's some correlation between the 2 worlds. I haven't, by the way, finished Inuyasha, but that makes it really cool when you are traveling between the 2 worlds and you're juggling 2 different lives. Narnia comes into my mind as a perfect example of an isekai series. But all of these isekais are forgetting the real world. They are forgetting the real world, and most of the time, the real world is lost in the dynamic. There's no correlation between the isekai being revolving around the real world. You see that in a bit in Bleach, for example, but it's very minimal. There's nothing really super important. The people are particularly in the real world, but the real world people are not really interacting with the magical stuff outside from like Ichigo's friends or something. So that's like, there are many examples of this where it's executed well. But enough about this rant about isekais. So now I kind of explain what is wrong about the isekai format in Japan. Now, luckily, solo leveling is fixing one of them, because the premise of the show revolves around humanity who has been facing these gates since a decade. These gates have started to emerge in the real world, and these gates are leading you into dungeons where there are monsters, and if the monsters are not defeated before the time goes on, that portal becomes, traversable from the other side. So the monsters actually emerge from the gate and start destroying the real world. So there's a dynamic here why they have to destroy these gates and why they have to complete the gates. Otherwise, the monsters from the gates are going to be emerging in the real world. And this setting, to my understanding, is pretty new. This has not happened in any other IP. Like, the closest thing that comes into my mind is like Stargate, but it's not even remotely similar to that. So this is like a new isekai setting, which is like creating this dynamic of people like actually trying to become hunters in the world. Like, because this is a Korean, you can definitely feel the economical aspects in the storytelling. Because in Korea, money is, well, it matters. It matters in that society. In Japan, yes, money matters, but it's not as predominant theme in the Japanese culture. And that's why I don't really have that many financial anime actually out there. And in this one, we kind of like talk about like people buying the gates, so their hunters guild can go like, dealing with the treasures inside the gates and stuff like that. And then the own main MC is like doing financial deals with other people. There are the financial aspects to this show. There's the RPG aspects to this show. There's the isekai aspects to this show. So there's a lot of like world building here. Granted, like the enemies and the monsters, like they're not like sentient, at least so far. None of them have like talked or anything. So they're not like the most interesting thing, but at least they are better than your average isekai series out there. So in terms of the world inside the gates, it's not the most interesting thing, but the way it interacts with the real world is to me interesting. And that's being kind of like one of the main hooks about this show. Now, the main character in this one is called Sung Jin-Woo. I'm just going to be referring him as Jin. And he is this like E-rank hunter, so everybody has this like a ranking thing, like this basically a power level system. And he is like the weakest hunter in the world. And basically, in the beginning of the anime, they are going into this dungeon, and that dungeon has like a double dungeon feature. I don't know if any MMOs actually have done anything like this or remotely similar, a dungeon within a dungeon. And well, things go really, really badly, and basically Jin is reincarnated, but now he has an access to this interface which allows him to level up. The other characters are not leveling up in this world. They are not, because the real world is not an isekai. It's not a game. It's a real world. But he's the only one that is getting into access to this leveling up system, and he can like become stronger by like leveling up and doing quests and different things. Now that sounds like kind of dumb at the beginning, and it was kind of dumb in the beginning, but it kind of starts to make a lot more sense as the story goes on. I don't know if there are like other characters who have an access to that thing, and if they do, that would make the story actually a lot better. But if it becomes this like absolute OP MC type of a thing eventually, that's just going to be crushing the story. But I've just a full disclosure, I have not read the manhwa, or I don't know what's going to happen in the season 2, which has been, by the way, announced already. So I can't really comment on the development of the story onwards. The premise here, it works, and there are some pitfalls here, like the MC becoming too overpowered. Whatever that's going to be ending up happening, I mean, he still can die. That's what you need to understand. He can still die, but whatever is going to be happening here remains to be seen, and I will reserve my judgment until we're going to be ending into that story. But so far, I'm liking all the character build-ups here and the story setups for certain characters that are going to be appearing. There are some other like high-skill ranked hunters which do not interact with the MC, but they are explored constantly throughout the show. kind of maybe even building up the premise here that they also have the access to this leveling up feature. Whatever that is true or not remains to be seen. That's just speculation on my part. Do not leave spoilers on the comments, by the way. So there are aspects about the show that are really good, and I like the premise here. And one of the things you also find about very Korean about the show is that the character looks different in the beginning, but once he starts working out, he becomes absolute fucking Chad. Like, and this is so Korean thing because Koreans are really into the gym culture. They're super competitive people, and it's just like fierceless society in that sense. Like, they try harding so hard. Like, watch the physical 100, for example. This is crazy. And you're seeing this here, definitely. Like, that's not something that happens on Japanese culture. Like, the Japanese kind of like accept that they are fucking losers, but they don't end up going into the gym. Like, that's really like very Japanese in a lot of ways. Like, they just kind of lack that underlying super drive that makes them go in. Even though they have like the most best like anime character motivationals coming from Japan, like still the people are kind of like not very aspired to do like real shit, like get things done. You don't see, like, when you go into Japan, you don't really see that many gyms out there. But that's a side point here. But that's the one thing I liked about the series, that the character actually goes through a character development, not just like her personality is changing, he's becoming a lot more edgy and maybe even cold in a lot of ways. So it's kind of falling into the dark side, and you get to like kind of feel that in the series too, that he's kind of like having some problems here with like a moral choices that he's going to be doing, and the way he's interacting with the world, and he's really tapping into that dark side. And that's kind of interesting to see that not only he's becoming physically different, he is also mentally changing, and that may be due to the system that he's interacting with, because which is the system is giving, or the console is giving him new quests, and there's going to be punishments if you're going to be not fulfilling those quests or meeting the deadlines. So that's kind of interesting. Now, in terms of like the OST, totally non-existent, nothing really worth mentioning here about it. I don't think there's anything amazing about it. The studio behind it is A1 Pictures. As you know, people who are like regular subscribers to this channel, I don't really care too much about the studios or the animation. I think the animation is where it needs to be. It's good, and I do like some aspect. There's very clean fights in this show. Let's be honest about that. There is blood, there's brutality here. It's just like I kind of like that aspect, but the characters themselves are kind of generic looking, and that's kind of big Korean style, to be fair. I think a lot of the Korean manhwas which we have seen being adapted, excluding the Tower of God, the characters look very generic, and I think like big draw-ins for me when I'm searching for new anime is always the designs. The designs are like the selling point for me to get me into the door and maybe fall in love with the characters and the premise and the story, etc. But yeah, I just see a lot of the generic stuff, and this is obviously a lot more generic than the other isekai series, but what can I say? I mean, the monsters do look cool, some of them actually, but the humans are kind of like plain looking here, and they remind me a lot of the Chinese designs actually, like donghua characters. But you know, the Koreans and the Chinese have a bit more. When they do the characters, they look a lot more human things, and you know, Japanese make characters that are a lot less taller for one, and it's just like the whole body archetype is not as elongated, you know, not tall people. But I think I said enough about Solo Leveling. If you hated isekais, this might be the thing that's kind of like fixing the thing for you, because it doesn't really undermine the faulty systems of isekai, because in isekai it's like, oh, the character died and now he's reborn. Okay, what's the stakes here? Is he gonna die again and reborn in another world or something like that? Like, that's just like dumb. And this is like Sword Art Online, like for example, like in the first world they went to, like everybody could die, and this world after nobody could die. Like, the stakes should always go up. That's the only way to do this. But, you know, if you want more reviews, and, you know, tell me, what is your favorite isekai? Is it these old isekais like Inuyasha, or are you really a fan of this new format of isekais? But the Japanese have to get really more creative with this stuff and create more interesting worlds. Like the whole isekais I'm watching, like, all just dog shit. This is not interesting me at all. And the whole like MMO RPG leveling thing, I'm not a too big fan of it, to be honest, even though I'm a big JRPG guy, because the leveling is not necessarily transparent to the fantasy characters at all, and shouldn't be, because that kind of kills the immersion. So the idea that the characters are aware of their level and stuff like that is kind of lame. I'm not gonna lie, it's a bit lame, but I digress. Thanks for watching, guys. And stay tuned for some other reviews from the winter 2024 season when I get around it, and maybe some of the current season as well will be dropping out later as too. Thanks for watching. I will be seeing you in the next video.